Now, Belfast waterfront has gone through an incredible transformation in the past decade or so. But today's developments weren't the first, as Jim O'Hagan explains.
Good afternoon, Walter. I hope you and the listeners have had the best possible summer. A few months ago I was in Dublin and made a visit whilst there to Glasnevin Cemetery. Just inside the entrance I came across the gravesite of a man whose work has had a profound influence on the development of the port of Belfast from when he first commenced it round about 1840. His name was William Dargan, and Dargan's Island, Queen's Island and the Victoria Channel will be forever associated with him. He was born on the 28th of February 1799 in County Carlow, the son of a gentleman farmer. William's early education is obscure, but we do know that in his early working life he was employed in Britain as a surveyor to the famous Scottish bridge and road builder Thomas Telford. He was chiefly involved with the building of the Holyhead railway line in North Wales, which at this time was a work of great magnitude. Under Thomas Telford he learned much which was to stand him in good stead when he returned to his native land. Dargan was known as the man who brought the train to Ireland, and he built the first railway, which ran from Dublin to Kingstown, now Dunleary, on the 17th of December 1838. The locomotive had a tall smokestack like the famous rocket by George Stephenson, and the carriages looked like stagecoaches strung together. Later he built the railway from Dublin to Drogheda, also those on both sides of Belfast Lough to Bangor and Carrickfergus, and in time south and west to Cork. The Ulster Canal was also his work. At the beginning of the 19th century, the shallowness of the water at the Belfast docks to the Garmoyle Pool was a great hindrance to the future development of the town as a port. The Garmoyle Pool was situated 3 miles below the town. In the early decades of the century, the body which had responsibility for the development of the port was the Ballast Board, which was a group of local commercial men, and it was acutely aware of these difficulties. At low tide there was only between 2 and 4.5 feet of water at the quays, and from there a narrow crooked channel existed, a lot of which was only 8 feet, and which did not exceed 16 feet in depth. Even allowing for the full spring tide, many vessels could not get near the then quays, and had to anchor approximately 3 miles from the town. Thus cargo and passengers had to be transferred to smaller craft at great inconvenience and extra cost. Passengers had to pay between 6 old pence and 1 shilling to get rowed to the quays, after perhaps a journey of 22 hours from Glasgow or Liverpool. In the early 1830s, the Ballast Board, whose headquarters then stood on approximately today's Customs House site, succeeded in getting a bill through Parliament, allowing improvements to be made to the approaches to the port. The scheme was entrusted to William Dargan, and he commenced eventually in 1839 to cut a new channel from Dunbar's Lock at the northern end of Corporation Street to the first bend of the old channel, which would deepen the approach. The work was completed in 1841 and had as a byproduct the creation of a 17-acre island from the slob and dredgings which became known as Dargan's Island. The port was now adequate for most shipping, and the cut allowed the town to be much easier reached in quicker time, thus benefiting passengers. Trade, both imports and exports, was greatly helped economically too. Dargan's Island, Walter, became the pleasure park of Belfast for many years. Ferry boats ran across to it, and the fare for the return journey was 1 old penny. The place housed a winter garden and a small zoo containing pheasants, parrots, monkeys, a raccoon, and a golden eagle. Its flower gardens were expansive and very well arranged. On one side of the island were bathing boxes which were highly popular with the crowds of visitors. It was the place to go at Easter and on fine summer evenings. To many, it had the added attraction of a sea voyage. A great glass house called the Crystal Palace, with a magnificent fountain, was a feature of the place. I have a photograph of the fountain and the building from a book of photographs from the Lawrence collection called In Belfast Town, 1864 to 1880, and published by Friars Bush Press. Neptune is the figure on the fountain, and the whole effect is very impressive. This photo is reputedly the only one still in existence of this fountain. At the northern end of the island stood a battery of mounted cannon, used for firing salutes on occasions of public joy. For many years after the island was used as a people's park, these cannons were resited at the front door of Ardree on Belfast's Antrim Road, the home of the noted antiquarian F.J. Bigger. Like the conservatory and the fountain, I do not know what subsequently happened to them. At certain times, balloon ascents were made from here, although before the island's time in 1825, the first attempt to travel through the air from Belfast town was made by a Livingstone. According to Cahill O'Byrne in his book As I Roved Out, Livingstone ascended from the back of the military barracks in North Queen Street to Fort William on the Shore Road. Great crowds followed the event, and at its conclusion he was carried back to town amid great excitement. Amongst the goings-on Dargan's Island were badger baiting and duck hunting. One of the excuses given for badger baiting by its followers was that it was supposed to distinguish the best terrier dogs. Duck hunting was seen by its adherents as advancing the pedigree of water spaniels. In 1852, there was a host of minor amusements taking place, like sack running and climbing greasy poles. The amusement arcade included such wonders as an executioner removing the head of Charles I, a master caning a pupil, and peep shows where battles could be viewed. These were all operated mechanically at 1 old penny a time. It was also a place where the poor children of the town were taken on Sunday school excursions to enjoy the fresh air and for treats. In 1845, several quays, such as the Donegal, Cunningham's, Hanover, Chichester and Merchants, were bought up, along with other properties, from their private owners, and in 1847 the Ballast Board became the Belfast Harbour Commissioners. Dargan was engaged to make a second cut to give even greater access to the docks and to alleviate unemployment. And on the 10th of July 1849 this was opened by William Perry, then a senior harbour commissioner, and grandfather of the later more famous Lord Perry, who was chairman of Harland and Wolff for many years. This cut became the Victoria Channel, and Dargan's Island became Queen's Island round about this time too. The Northern Whig described the scene, and I quote, "Thousands of flags blew from the northward, with which the shipping was made gay. All Belfast was making holiday, so thronged were both banks of the river." Queen Victoria visited Belfast in 1849. To make deeper berths for the bigger ships which could now come up channel, a new Donegal quay was built out across the front of the earlier docks, which were filled in, and Albert and Corporation squares were built. Across the river at Queen's Quay were made berthing positions for smaller vessels, mainly colliers. The new Donegal quay meant the virtual closure of the earlier shipyards, which were in this area. The first shipyard in Belfast had been set up here in 1795 by William Ritchie. In 1851, the shipyard of Thompson and Kirwan was relocated on Queen's Island, and this was followed in 1853 by the yard of Robert Hickson with his general manager Edward Harland. In 1858, Harland bought out Hickson with a loan of £5,000 which he had obtained. The history of Harland and Wolff, it became so named in 1861 when Wolff joined as a partner, would be a story in itself. But here it is sufficient to say that in the early days Harland had applied to the authorities in Birkenhead to build a shipyard there. He did not get the land for this that he sought. It's interesting to speculate that the social and perhaps political history of Belfast might have been rather different had he succeeded and had not developed his operations here. Queen's Island in the 1860s became increasingly associated with shipbuilding, and by the mid-1870s the place had more or less ceased to be a pleasure park. However, as late as the early 1880s, we find Willie John Ashcroft at the Alhambra Theatre still singing about the island, when he adapted a verse of his immortal song, The Solid Man, to go as follows. At Hollywood and at Dargan's Island, with merry friends I oft go there, to enjoy the summer recreation and the refreshing Lagan air. The demise of the place, Walter, as a public park reminds us how industrial expansion limited recreational facilities for poorer people. By the 1870s too, the two principal bathing places for working-class people at Donegal Quay and the Long Strand at the foreshore by the Newtonards Road were also closed due to industrialisation. The term the island has passed into the language of everyday Belfast, and today is synonymous with having worked in Harland and Wolff. People in the past often describing themselves as island men. By the late 1840s, Dargan had become a very rich man. His schemes in Belfast alone were very expensive. In so doing, he gave employment through his various contracts to 100,000 men in Ireland, and we are told was a most enlightened employer in the mid-19th century. All told, his works extended to some 1,200 miles of railways, tunnels, embankments and canals. Like Harland, he had a great Victorian work ethic about him. He was a very modest person. In 1853, Dargan gave nearly £100,000 for the purpose of designing and setting up the great Irish exhibition of that year in Merrion Square in Dublin. It was, in the words of one chronicler, to bring into bright and brilliant array the products of every clime and the fruits of every kind of industry, thus aping the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. The arts of Italy, the shawls of India and Kashmir, the china of Dresden, and carpet from Brussels were all represented. All manner of the products and manufactures of Ireland were there as well. The promotion of Irish industry was Dargan's chief aim. Foreign monarchs and many noblemen assisted and came to his aid. Some 15,000 people attended the opening of the exhibition, which very much added to the rising prestige of Dargan. To have the exhibition opened on time, some 1,000 to 1,500 people were employed on the project. It ran until the 31st of October 1853, when 12,000 people attended the closing ceremony. In July of 1853, a meeting was held in Dublin, headed by the Lord Mayor and the Great and the Good, where William Dargan was publicly thanked. Dargan also financially assisted generously in the funding of the National Gallery of Ireland, which was opened in Merrion Square in Dublin in 1864. A statue of him there by Farrell was unveiled at the same time. Dargan also contributed valuable paintings to the gallery, which formed part of the original collection. Queen Victoria visited Dublin during the Great Exhibition of 1853 and called, along with her husband, Prince Albert, to Dargan's house at Mount Anvil to congratulate him, but he wasn't at home. He was in fact in the city enjoying the celebrations attached to her visit and was not trying in any way to snub her. I find this rather intriguing, Walter. You would have thought he would have known of her visit to his house, wouldn't you? I can't imagine this sort of thing happening today with the present Queen and her advisers. Queen Victoria, I'm sure, wasn't amused. Someone slipped up somewhere. Later, though, she did call a second time to his house, and this time was entertained along with her family by him. The Queen offered him a baronetcy, but he turned the honour down. We are not told why. Financially, the exhibition was not a success for Dargan. It is estimated that he lost £20,000 of his own money in staging and promoting it. His last years were clouded by money worries on his part. In 1866, he had a fall from his horse and never fully recovered from it. And on the 7th of February 1867, he died at his house in Fitzwilliam Square in Dublin, a month before his 68th birthday. Many dignitaries were present at his funeral, and he was deeply mourned. Today, Walter, Belfast has fittingly remembered him by naming a number of roadways in the dock area of the city after him. These include Dargan Road, Dargan Crescent and Dargan Drive. And like the Queen's Island, they are built on reclaimed land from the sea. Just this summer, the new Lewis transport system was opened in Dublin by Father Dan Dargan, a great-grand-nephew of William Dargan, in honour of the 19th century industrialist. And so, a son of Carlo made his mark on Belfast and other places, and has given them the means through the development of transport by which their economic life has prospered. He was an eminent Victorian whose departing, in the words of the great American poet Longfellow, left behind him footprints on the sands of time.
Jim O'Hagan.